Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mohammed Abdel, and this is my podcast, Theater Criticism 101. I'll be your host to this 3-episode series that explores what it means to become a theater critic. The purpose of creating this podcast is to provide a sort of illustration of how one may develop as a novice theater critic. Personally, from an unsure and humble start to an informed and confident outcome, this podcast will serve as a chronicle of my personal development of the writing, my perspective, and my competence as a theater critic. I'm a student at Brock University and minor in dramatic arts. Although I've yet to fully immerse myself within the discipline, I was given an opportunity to take DART 3P94 Theater Criticism by the professor, Dr. Karen Fricker. Theater praxis professor at Brock University. Karen is a theater critic at the Toronto Star and was a lecturer at the University of London from 2007 to 2012. Originally from Los Angeles, Karen earned her PhD in theater studies from the School of Drama at Trinity College in Dublin. She is the Vice President of the Canadian Theatre Association, member of the Canadian Association for Theatre Research, and co-founded the Irish Theatre magazine with Willie White in 1998, with the aim of providing in-depth critical coverage of Irish theatre. In 2018, Professor Fricker was awarded the Nathan Cohen Award for Excellence in Critical Writing. Although I was missing the prerequisites, Karen was kind enough to allow me to register for the third-year Dramatic Arts course open to dramatic arts majors and minors. The course is described as an introduction to the practical craft of and the theoretical background to theater criticism, and a total of 14 students is what comprised the class. Normally, the course consists of students heading to traditional theater spaces and actually watching live theater to then review. But due to coronavirus restrictions, that has been transferred to an online virtual format where digital theater and film productions are the focus of the course. Lastly, it's worth mentioning that this course was accelerated. Normally conducted in a 4-month period, it was condensed to a 2-week time frame. Now, with all that house cleaning out the way, we can finally begin to explore the world of theater criticism. I hope you enjoy the series and learn something new about theater criticism. Hey, my name is Mohammed Abdel, and you're listening to the first episode of my 3-part series, Theater Criticism 101. Episode 1, Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gained, Learning New Ropes. So this is a podcast about theater criticism. It's important that we understand what that means. Author of the book, How to Write About Theater, a manual for critics, students, and bloggers, Mark Fisher, a British critic, theorist, and philosopher, defines theater criticism as an act of translation, turning the language of performance into the language of words. Theater criticism is a deep, analytical discourse of the production that takes into account its social, political, and cultural bearings. The discussion becomes a highly theoretical, objective discourse on the historical significance of the production. One of the first readings we did in this course was a piece co-authored by Professor Fricker that detailed the basics to writing and reviewing theater: description, analysis, and judgment. The description is pretty self-explanatory. This is a section where you explain what happened, where it happened, how it happened, things along those lines. The description is just about describing the plot, painting the picture, essentially. Now, analysis, this is where we reflect on what did it mean. How does the piece or how does the part relate to society? Analysis requires a bit more of a critical thought, because at this point, it's beyond what we've actually seen, and it's tying this in to the greater scheme of things. Analysis is essentially about relating the show to the world around it. Now, the final part is judgment. Now, this one's also kind of self-explanatory. It's how did it work? Was it of quality? Was it any good? How did you feel about it? Now, this last part, this is where it presents itself as far more subjective than certainly the first, where the only goal in the descriptive element is to relay as objectively as possible what goes down in the actual performance with regards to the story, the movement, the setting, the design, things along those lines. Judgment, on the other hand, is very subjective in the sense where it is you. How do you feel with that description and that analysis made about the quality of this piece? Was it great? Would you recommend it? What was wrong with it? What was fantastic about it? Karen also goes on to mention some key practices that are really helpful when it comes time to reviewing and critiquing theater. One of which is naming everyone involved, whether it's the directors, actors, designers. If you're going to refer to the work of any individual, refer to that individual as well by name. Research is super important as well. Like reading up about the company, the show, the venue is pretty important because this is the way that you're going to actually be able to tie the analysis in and really connect it to the world. Without that information, it would be hard to accurately do that. Another important tip is to write in present tense. Present tense is more engaging and it allows for more in-depth description. Perhaps the biggest key to good review writing, as Karen puts it, is revision. She says that more than half of great writing is the editing behind it, and that is something I definitely stand by. Now, mind you, before these readings, I had very little insight into what theater criticism itself was, let alone how to write it. I was unsure of what to focus on, like within the review itself, during the performance where my eyes should be, or how even to accurately illustrate what I see. To make matters worse, I was a part of the class that seemed very capable and experienced in this area. However, after reading the second chapter of Fisher's book, I started to definitely get more confident in what it means to even review, critique, write about theater. Well, at least I thought I did. In this chapter, Fisher introduces Alessandro Manzoni's 3 questions about critiquing theater. What were theater makers trying to do? How well did they do it? And was it worth it? Now, these 3 questions align with the description, analysis, and judgment components introduced by Karen earlier, but they take them a step further. By asking what were theater makers trying to do, what Manzoni is doing here is distinguishing personal perception from artistic aim. So what that means is basically, instead of describing what you see, describe what they were trying to do. In other words, the show must be assessed objectively and on its own terms, not what you would like it to be. Now, how well do they do it is still in theater makers' territory, but it starts to introduce one's own powers of discrimination. As Fisher puts it, you are still trying to review the show as objectively as possible at this point, while at the same time tying it into the world around it. However, above all else, this analysis has to have bearing on the thing that is being attempted by theater makers. Manzoni's last question, was it worth it? At this point, this is the critic's perspective almost entirely. You still have to judge the show on its own terms, but you are free, essentially, to judge it how you will on those terms laid out in the descriptive and analytical stages. Now, at this point in the course, we have viewed our second performance, the first being How to Fail as a Pop Star, and the second being Dear Ireland. Dear Ireland is a 3-part collection of short monologues that tells the tale of Irish theater makers and artists and their response to COVID-19 and social distancing guidelines, disrupting traditional theater spaces. Jimmy Murphy's The Meadow, starring Claire Dunn, is the production I decided to review. Now, I'm not going to read it to you, but looking back on it now, my first review, mind you, I can't even recognize where I was. It's extremely long. I use way too many words. I really failed to apply Manzoni's 3 questions, particularly judging the piece on the merits of the attempt. The comments Karen made on this are ample as well, but I will read you one in just in part. As I've said in my comments, I find something of a disconnect in your argument. I think that alone pretty much encapsulates that first review attempt, because despite being familiar with Manzoni's 3 questions and despite learning the descriptive, analytical, judgment components of theater reviewing, applying them in actual practice was certainly something that requires just that, practice. If nothing else, that review taught me that identifying what theater makers were trying to do is a task much harder than it may appear. Tune in to next episode to find out more about my journey as a theater critic.